Xtalks connects professionals in the life science, medical device, and food industries with useful content like webinars, job openings, articles, and virtual meetings to help you succeed in your career. This food industry-focused podcast brings together some of our editorial staff to share insights into the latest B2B industry news to help keep you up to date.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Xtalks Food Podcast. I'm Sydney Perlmutter, Senior Food Industry Journalist and Webinar Moderator at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm joined by special guest Sheelagh Daly. Sheelagh is the Foreign Direct Investment, or FDI, Manager at Enterprise Ireland. So, Sheelagh, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Sydney.
So before I get into the food industry specific questions, can you tell me a little bit about your role at Enterprise Ireland and what Enterprise Ireland is?
Yes, of course. So Enterprise Ireland is the Irish government agency responsible for supporting the startup and scaling of companies in the manufacturing and internationally traded services sectors. So we work with companies across all sectors, from construction, engineering, ICT, medtech, pharma, etc., and a very significant amount of food and beverage companies. So we have a food division within Enterprise Ireland dedicated to working with food and beverage manufacturing companies. And within that division, we are responsible for attracting inward investment into Ireland. So that's attracting foreign-owned food and beverage companies who are looking to internationalize and are looking for a European base to set up operations, whether that's to carry out research and development or indeed to set up a manufacturing operation or enter into a joint venture. So it's our job to make that as easy as possible to navigate that system, and we do that by working very closely with companies that are interested in setting up in Ireland. And we have a lot of US companies that we work with.
So in terms of now the food industry, what are some of the latest innovative trends that you've sort of noticed in Ireland's food industry?
Well, I think it probably is going to reflect what is happening across the industry, really. It's quite a sophisticated industry in Ireland, but you can see that what's happening is being very much driven by health and wellness. And also by sustainability. So if you like, two key macro drivers for what's happening. And that's kind of reflected in what we see in terms of research, development and innovation, which is kind of going across functional ingredients, alternative ingredients, personalized nutrition, improving nutrient density, valorization of byproducts. And then also around the whole area of developing minimal processing techniques, around packaging, delivery mechanisms for human nutrition benefits, and across the sector as well, improvements in safety and quality, traceability, transparency, and customer engagement. So yeah, that's in a nutshell what we're seeing.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, we're seeing it sort of all across the food industry. And now specific to the Irish government, what role does it play in fostering innovation within the food industry?
Well, I suppose it's important to say that the food industry is a hugely important industry in Ireland. So for historical, cultural, traditional reasons, but also because it makes a really significant contribution to the Irish economy. So we work with mainly Indigenous Irish companies across all sectors. And as I mentioned, in food, we are also specifically responsible for foreign-owned companies as well as Irish companies. But if we look at the exports from all of the client companies that Enterprise Ireland works with, the food industry actually is contributing almost half of all of those exports. And of that, the FDI exports alone are contributing 10%. So the companies, the FDI companies in food. And in addition to that, 1 in 4 people employed by EI client companies is working in the food and beverage sector. So I suppose that's just setting the scene as to why there is such significant government commitment. And I think it's something that makes Ireland very attractive for foreign investors in food, because there is a genuine commitment for lots of very good reasons, as I've outlined, by the Irish government. And you can see that in terms of For example, obviously we have a cabinet minister, a dedicated Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and also the department that we're actually sitting under, Department of Enterprise. But in addition to that, a lot of state bodies, national bodies that are set up specifically to support the food industry. And I don't think there's any other industry sector in Ireland that has that extent of support, whether it's sector specific. For example, we have a body looking after the seafood industry, whether it's looking at marketing. So we have a national body supporting companies to promote their food on export markets and ingredients and so on. And also, very importantly, from an innovation perspective, we have a national government body specifically for research and development in the food industry, and which is called Teagasc. And actually, some of your listeners may be familiar with Teagasc. It's remarkable how well known the work of Teagasc is, particularly in the US, and actually how many people working in US food companies have done PhDs and scientific research based in Teagasc Moorpark. So I'm sure there's some people listening that might know what I'm talking about. But so yeah, an enormous amount of support available, and then obviously through ourselves, direct supports that we can talk about in more detail.
And I was just going to ask, sort of in that realm of R&D, how does Ireland's food industry leverage technology and R&D for growth and innovation? What are some of the ways?
Yeah, so in terms of leveraging the technology for growth, as I said, so the Irish government, we through ourselves support a lot of research and innovation centres, so scientific and technology centres. So that would include, for example, we have a specific centre dedicated to Irish manufacturing research. So that's on all of the whole processing side. There's a centre dedicated to the use of AI and the growing use of digitization, and again, very much a focus on food there as well. And then our universities and academic institutions, a lot of funding comes through from the Irish government through ourselves to those institutions. And in addition to that, obviously, we fund companies directly to carry out research. So there's a very strong emphasis coming from the Irish government to encourage the use of research and development and technology to make sure that the companies located here can compete and are as productive and competitive and innovative as possible, so that we can scale on global markets. I mean, Ireland is a small country, so in some ways we're real experts at looking at how to compete on global markets, because we've always had to be. With a small domestic population, it's very outward looking, and I think it's one of the key strengths that we can offer companies that look to locate here is that level of expertise and that global outlook that we have from the start with companies.
I was just going to ask as well. So, how does Ireland's food industry contribute to the global food innovation landscape? And can you give some examples, perhaps?
Yeah, so I mean, as I said, there we are. I mean, dairy, I think, is probably a great example, right? So again, for decades, several decades at this point, we have been engaging in research in the dairy industry, and I think we would be considered, kind of world leaders in terms of our expertise in dairy ingredients and dairy processing. So, and that obviously that research and development in technology and in innovation and in terms of science around ingredients has been adopted and is being used in many places around the world as a result of research carried out here. You can see as well, we would be considered again world leaders in terms of microbiome research. So we have a very well-renowned research centre called APC, which is based in the University College Cork, which is doing a lot of research into the microbiome and, of course, that gut-brain axis that everyone is talking about, and developing solutions, almost food as preventative medicine, and solutions for human nutrition.
So in terms of incentives, what incentives does Ireland offer to foreign investors in the food industry?
Yeah, so again, we're very keen to attract foreign direct investment in the food industry. And I suppose the first thing I'd say is that we try to make it as easy and efficient as possible. So we, and myself and my team and David, who's located in Chicago, so we have team members in different locations around the world. So we will work directly with a company that's interested in setting up in Ireland, and we'll take them through all of the elements in terms of access to information, making the right introductions, bringing them into the ecosystem, delivering inward itineraries so they can actually come in and see and speak to Irish companies. So there's that very much a personal approach to every company that's thinking of setting up here. But in terms of, overall incentives, I suppose one thing that I should mention, particularly since we're talking about research and innovation, is we have significant tax credits available through the revenue commissioners. So there's a 30% R&D tax credit. And if you kind of look at the fact that our corporation tax is 12.5%, I won't get into the semantics, but if you're over a 750 million euro turnover, it is going to be a bit higher than that, but nothing more than 15%. But between that and the R&D tax credits, it makes it extremely attractive to carry out R&D in Ireland. And then we offer a lot of direct incentives to companies. So through Enterprise Ireland, once the company has located in Ireland and set up an operation, there's direct financial supports to that company. So that can be for employment, capital expenditure, with very significant commitment around our sustainability initiatives on environmental aid. So there's very significant financial investments for companies to carry out, to ensure that their companies are aiming towards low carbon emissions and net zero. And then on the research side, as I said, we fund both collaborative research. So and we have companies that have kind of entered Ireland on the foot of undertaking collaborative research project with an Irish company and an Irish academic institution, which we have funded, and that can be funded up to 80%. And then we fund also direct funding to companies for the in-house R&D. And there's lots of others I probably have forgotten to mention, but I suppose it's the financial incentives are very important. But I think the key thing that people find useful is they've one point of contact that helps them to navigate the entire ecosystem. And Ireland is very highly networked, integrated in the, particularly in food, but it's an integrated ecosystem. So, it's easy for companies to embed themselves here, to get to know other companies, to understand the legal system, the banking system, and it can all happen through the conduit of a personal relationship with an advisor from Enterprise Ireland. So,
and you started to touch on this a little bit, but how does sustainability and green innovation influence FDI in Ireland's food sector?
Yeah, so the Irish government obviously is committed entirely to the sustainable growth of the food and beverage industry, and we have commitments as set out in our Food Vision 2030. We've also international commitments to reduce our carbon emissions from enterprise by 35% by 2030, and that's all underpinned then by, as I said, incentives and supports from the government to enable our companies to do that. And a lot of those, and most of those supports would be available to companies from ourselves. So we would help companies to look at what can they actually undertake and how can we support them to do it. But that commitment by the Irish government is a binding commitment, and we are looking at very much looking at an integrated food systems approach to all of that. To achieving those targets. It's also worth mentioning that Origin Green, which is the only, I think, national food and drink sustainability program, was introduced in Ireland a number of years ago, and that is very much about it's from farm to fork. So it's a sustainability program that's looking at the supply chain the entire way from where it's being grown to the final retailer. That has been very effective in raising awareness of sustainability and helping us to achieve our goals.
Now, what are some partnerships and or collaborations that exist between Irish food companies and then some international investors?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of partnerships, they can take many different forms, right? So when it comes to international investors, so what the types of partnership arrangements that we might see, for example, are joint ventures. So, for example, Tina, which is a Norwegian, large Norwegian dairy company that I'm sure people would be aware of, partnering with Dairygold, an Irish producer of dairy ingredients. We have Tier Lawn, again, an Irish company partnering with Royal Aware. You'd see that there's a dairy link there, but there are other examples in other sectors in the food and beverage industry. So those are joint ventures where there's a supply of specialized ingredients availability. There's an expertise in the processing. There's the availability of talent to actually set up this manufacturing facility of a very high level available within the country, and those joint ventures arise out of that. There's also obviously then, and I mentioned it already, joint research and development projects. So we're seeing a lot of that. And I can't really mention names on that, but let's say, there'd be some fairly well-known names of companies from the US who are working with Irish companies and with Irish academic institutions. And it is that really interesting collaboration where you're collaborating with an industry partner and an academic institution for that early stage discovery, fundamental type research that is heavily funded by the Irish government. So that type of collaboration and joint venture taking place. And then, of course, in terms of international investors looking at the high potential startups that we work with. So I had mentioned when I was talking about Enterprise Ireland, we work with companies to start and scale. So we would be putting funding into about 100 high potential startups. So that's seed funding, early stage funding every year. And we see increasingly a lot of interest from large food and beverage companies in looking at where could they put some investment? Where could they add value to these companies? And potentially, I suppose, certain acquisitions as well. I mean, we've seen acquisitions that have really supported companies that were very innovative to grow. A good example of that in the public domain is Ajinomoto, who acquired a company called New Ultra, which is in food for special medical purposes, very innovative Irish company. And that support by Ajinomoto has allowed that company to really scale much more rapidly than it might have done otherwise. So those are just some examples.
And are there any emerging niches or specialties within Ireland's food industry that are attracting FDI?
Yeah, so again, I suppose it's really probably going back to the initial question where you asked me about the trends in food innovation. That is where we're seeing the interest. So the expertise that lies within our research performing organizations and the R&D community is where we're seeing a lot of interest from companies all over the world who are looking to Ireland to help them develop solutions to those growing sectors of health and wellness and sustainability. So it's very much in that area, I think, that you would see the attraction of FDI, and I suppose the pattern of FDI as well in terms of foreign companies who, so maybe 20 years ago, we might have seen a company deciding to set up a large manufacturing facility in Ireland. Now we're attracting companies to come in, set up an entity in Ireland to carry out research, to develop, and then arising out of that to hopefully expand their footprint into other activities in Ireland. And we're seeing some success in terms of our strategy in that direction.
And how do food companies within Ireland use FDI to expand their presence in international markets?
Well, it's funny that you should say that because what might surprise audiences in the US, given the size of Ireland, is that Ireland is actually ranked 9th in the world in terms of the FDI into the US. So I know ninth doesn't sound very high, but when you consider, Ireland's not a huge country, that's fairly significant. So, and I mean, there's a couple of great examples. Kerry Foods. So Kerry Foods, obviously an Irish multinational company, which is, it's one of Ireland's largest food companies. And in fact, they set up their first innovation center in Beloit in Wisconsin, which then served as a blueprint for other innovation centers that they set up around the world, including in Ireland. But Beloit was the first. So, and obviously there's many manufacturing plants that Kerry has around the US. And then Glanbia, which is again a large Irish company. They're involved in the performance nutrition, whey protein, Slim Fast, those types of products. And then Ornua Kerrygold butter. I'm sure some of the people who are listening to this may have had that with their breakfast. So foreign direct investment from Ireland into the US is very active, and it's seen as a market that a lot of our companies look to when they're looking to international expansion. So there's a lot of companies, obviously I haven't mentioned, but smaller companies that are trying to establish themselves in the US. But the other way around is also very important to mention, because there's a huge benefit to our SMEs, or medium enterprises located in Ireland from the foreign direct investment that comes in and takes place in Ireland. It contributes to obviously to the R&D discovery and the sharing of knowledge and the collaboration. It also very much contributes to talent development, as well as the spend in the Irish economy, the supply chain opportunities, the supply of raw materials. The FDI sector is hugely important inward in terms of the way it directly benefits Irish companies located in Ireland, as well as obviously the benefit for Irish companies to look at FDI into the US.
Then last question for you. So what is the role of academic and research institutions in driving food innovation in Ireland? I know you touched on it a bit.
Yeah, so it's very important. And I think one of the things that we find that is commented on when we have visitors is the really integrated ecosystem when it comes to research. So there's been many, many years of emphasis by the Irish government on the connecting research into industry, and for research organizations to really collaborate very closely with industry. So we see that tripartite kind of approach between government, industry, and academia. And as I said, that is driven, partially by funding that comes from the government and then from within the research institutions themselves, to develop novel concepts, and in the case of novel ingredients and some novel products, but also processing technologies, artificial intelligence, and so on. I think it can't be underestimated, the role of what I would say to you, the role of the academic institutions and the research performing organizations is absolutely central to driving what's happening in innovation in the food industry in Ireland, and supporting us to be attractive as a location for foreign companies to invest in Ireland.
All right. Well, Sheelagh, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. Lovely to meet you.
All right. Well, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Food Podcast. If you like today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Xtalks Food Industry Podcast. If you enjoyed our discussions today, please share the episode with your friends and colleagues, and be sure to subscribe in order to be notified when a new episode is released. To join in on the discussion, you can find Xtalks on social media. Email podcast@xtalks.com or comment on the articles directly. Links are in the show description. Take a moment to join our community at xtalks.com to get access to everything we have to offer, including webinars, job listings, virtual meetings, articles, and more. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast are those of the speakers sharing them. They should not be taken as professional advice and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.